Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kennan Institute. My name is Isabella Tobarovsky, and I'm a senior advisor with the Kennan Institute. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation about Vladimir Kara-Murza's sentencing and the response to it from the Russian civil society abroad. Before we begin, I encourage you to stay up to date on Kennan's events by visiting our website. There you can subscribe to our English language blogs, Focus Ukraine and the Russia File, and our Russian language blog, In Other Words. You can also subscribe to our podcasts, Kennan X and the Russia File. We have a really powerful speaker lineup for us today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome President and CEO of the Wilson Center, Ambassador Mark Green, to offer introductory remarks.
Thanks, Isabella, and thanks for your great work from shaping our partnerships to groundbreaking blogs. Very much appreciate all that you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wilson Center. You know, we're a unique institution in foreign policy. We're congressionally chartered, scholarship-driven, and fiercely independent and nonpartisan. And I think that special status also creates certain obligations for us to not duplicate what others are doing, but instead to prioritize the most important issues, the issues that matter most to America and what Americans hold dear. That also means that we can, and indeed we must, call out injustice whenever we see it, especially when that injustice has global implications. This morning is just one of those occasions. Yesterday, a court in the Russian Federation sentenced journalist and political activist Vladimir Kara-Murza to 25 years in prison because he dared to speak out against Putin's war on Ukraine. Kara-Murza's response to the sentencing, published last week in the Washington Post, included the following message, quoting, he said, "I subscribe to every word that I have spoken and every word of which I've been accused by this court. I blame myself for only one thing, that over the years of my political activity, I have not managed to convince enough of my compatriots and enough politicians in the democratic countries of the danger that the current regime in the Kremlin poses for Russia and for the world. Today, this experience is obvious to everyone, but at a terrible price, the price of war." Ladies and gentlemen, this verdict is only the latest attack launched against my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza. As the Washington Post has noted, he's been poisoned twice in 2015 and 2017. He's been followed by Russian officers. His friends and associates have been attacked, jailed, and in some cases killed. Kara-Murza has described his imprisonment as a kind of badge of honor worn by Russian oppositionists before him. Friends, Vladimir may have predecessors who have also been attacked and imprisoned on orders from the Kremlin, but he has few equals. He has spoken often, far and wide, in his homeland of Russia, but also in the UK and across the United States. Along the way, as I've just mentioned, Russian security forces poisoned him twice, nearly killing him both times. I first met him after the first such time. Each time he returned, physically damaged perhaps, but morally stronger and certainly more determined. Everywhere he goes, he has called for people to recognize that Vladimir Putin has set Russia on a course to tyranny. With his sentencing yesterday and with more than a year of Putin's brutal war behind us, events have sadly proven how prophetic Vladimir was. For me, Vladimir is more than an activist to admire. He is a friend. And Vladimir has lots of friends here in this country and all around the world. Senator John McCain admired him so much that he asked Vladimir to be one of his pallbearers. So President Putin may think today that he has succeeded in silencing one of his harshest critics. In truth, he is elevating Vladimir's example for all of us to follow. Putin may think he is showing his strength. In reality, Putin is proving his weakness. He is afraid of Vladimir Kara-Murza and the truth that he represents. Today's event is intended to take a closer look at Vladimir's impact, to examine the lessons that his fellow Russian journalists and activists in exile should take from his long and very much ongoing struggle against the Putin system. Those exiled individuals are coming together with recent open letters calling for the release of both Vladimir and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Today's conversation will explore what this collective action might hope to accomplish in coming months. And while today's conversation clearly will not end Vladimir's incarceration or end the other Vladimir's misrule, I very much hope in some ways it will hasten both. Isabella, thanks again for your leadership, and I turn it back to you, and I look forward to hearing from our panel of experts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Green, for these powerful remarks. Before we continue, I'd like to remind our audience that if you would like to ask a question, please submit it via the Q&A function on the Zoom. Please include your name and affiliation when sending the questions. I'd like to start our conversation with Dr. Ivan Pavlov. Dr. Ivan Pavlov is a human rights lawyer and one of Russia's best-known legal experts in the cases related to the disclosure of state secrets, treason, and espionage in particular. He has worked on the most sensitive and high-profile cases of this kind, including those of prominent academics, journalists, activists, and even ordinary citizens wrongly charged with treason, espionage, and extremism. He's a former Galina Starovoitova Human Rights Fellow here at Canon. Ivan, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, Isabella. Thank you very much for introduction. And just I think I would cover, legal side and legal facts, what's happened yesterday with Vladimir Kara-Murza, actually what's happened with our country, with my country. So Vladimir Kara-Murza was last year was accused, and yesterday he was recognized guilty in a commitment of the 3 crimes like this. Gosizmena, it's state treason, participation in activity of the undesirable organization, and the public dissemination of fakes about military forces of Russia. So absurdity of the accusation for me is obvious due to what kind of actions was recognized like a criminal by prosecution side and yesterday court decision. So it's public speeches. Public speeches of Vladimir Kara-Murza on different public events. Concretely, so first crime, like participation in an activity of undesirable organizations, is Article 284.1 Criminal Code of Russia. Point 1, it means it's quite new article. It appears in a criminal code in 2015 only. So what the actions inside this crime was recognized criminal. October 27, 2021, in Moscow, Vladimir, like a representative of the Free Russia Foundation, was participating in a conference in Moscow, which was organized by Sakharov Center and dedicated to the political prisoners. I remember this conference very good because I also participated in it and made a speech. So another crime, it's a public dissemination of the fakes about Russian army. It's Article 207.3. It means also a new article in the criminal code. It appears only in July, actually in March last year. So inside this crime, that March 15, 2022, in the states of Arizona, Vladimir made a speech in a chamber of the representative of Arizona about the work crimes and aggressive war Russian regime was initiated in Ukraine. So detail that that prosecution side that counts that Vladimir did it because it was some kind of order from the Free Russia Foundation. So eventually it's a third crime. It's a state treason. State treason in a third form. It's assistance to the foreign organization in conducting activity against the security of the Russia. Here they speak about, Free Russia Foundation, same organization mentioned in a accusation list. So here was recognized like a crime, free public speeches Vladimir in a different meetings. First meeting, it was in Lisbon in October 2021 on a parliament assembly NATO, and he spoke about unlegitimacy of the election in Russia. Second speech was in Oslo, also in October 2021, on a ceremony of the award of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. And he spoke about the awful condition with the political prisoners in Russia. Third speech was also outside of Russia, it was a distantly participation in a hearings of a U.S. Helsinki Commission when he, in March 2022, spoke about the iron informational curtain in Russia and about the situation in Ukraine, accordingly with invasion of Russia in Ukraine. So this is first implementation of the third form of the state treason. Before that, it was a like sort of sleeping norm, never was implemented on a practice. I can explain about all options, all forms of the state treason which we have now in a Russian criminal code. The first two is quite traditional. It's a espionage and a disclosure of state secrets. It's, usually they implement only this form for the accusation of the people. Third form, as I told, that never was implemented. It's an assistance to the foreign organization in conducting activity against the security of the Russia. And last year, in a criminal code, another form appears, like fourth form. It's like transition, crossing to the, or switching to the side of enemy. So we see that yesterday decision, actually it was a first decision about the implementation of the third form of the state treason, and such a huge sentence like 25 years in a prison. It means that it's not only about the legal side. It's like, from my point of view, it's very emotional message, and we see that Russian regime now considered Kara-Murza like an enemy, and it's obvious for me. Thank you, and sorry for my English.
No, your English is fine. Actually, let me ask you a follow-up question right away, because this I think the invocation of this idea of state treason and this sentencing of 25 years, I mean, a lot of people have been saying that this is really a return, a rollback to Stalinist level repressions, because that's what we associate with those times. What is your thought about that?
Yeah, you know, that we feel like a court system each year until 2022 increase the amount of years which they give like a sentence to the prisoners who accused in a state treason. For example, in last year, journalist Ivan Safronov just got a sentence 22 years. And it's already, you know, like huge, yeah. But I think it's just a sign of the time, military time, which we face in Russia, and they trying to increase the degree of the quite patriotism, yeah, and just to choose the enemy of the people, and just how to say, указать на них, just to show everybody that was somebody who is internal enemy, because you know everybody knows who is the external enemies now. And it's like about this. It's about how to increase the level of the patriotism and xenophobia.
And once again, the search for internal enemies, that's of course also very much reminiscent of the 1930s. Thank you very much, Ivan. We'll circle back to you with more questions. Next, I'd like to turn to Ekaterina Kotrikadze, who is the news director and an anchor at TV Rain. Ekaterina fled Russia when TV Rain was forced to shut down last year, in March of last year. And TV Rain is now broadcasting from Amsterdam and from several other places. Ekaterina, I'd like to ask you maybe to talk about the response to this case on the part of the independent journalist community, Russian independent journalists who are now essentially all living abroad. Your community issued a letter in defense of Vladimir Kara-Murza. So talk to us about that, please.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I think it's really very important to talk about this case. We all understand that we cannot do much to help, but at least we can talk. At least we can keep on working our journalistic job. At least we can still try to fight. Yes, from abroad, but this is the only thing that we can do. And this is the only tool we have in our hands right now. So together with other journalists, including Sergei Parkhomenko, who is here right now, we cover this story and we won't stop covering this story. We are right now at TV Rain preparing, kind of a big story about Vladimir Kara-Murza, about his fight, and about the things that he was trying to show to Russian community, to Russia as a country and Russia as a state. And what I was thinking to talk about is that I've been knowing Vladimir for a lot of years, since 2012, I think. And when he was mostly a journalist, I met him in the US. I remember how proud he was when I met him in 2018, February 27th in Washington, D.C., when together with other prominent Americans and Russians, I was there as a reporter. Vladimir Kara-Murza was opening Boris Nemtsov Plaza in front of Russian's embassy in the capital of the United States of America. To him, it was the biggest, it was so important. It was an achievement for him. We all know, and Vladimir was never hiding it, that it was not easy to get this done, because there is another very important thing that he was fighting. Maybe this is the most important thing that he was fighting, one of the most important things, that it was not easy to persuade people, influential people in the West, that sanctions should be imposed, that there are people in Russia responsible for human rights violation, for corruption, for kleptocracy. Vladimir Kara-Murza is the person who was the best in this terribly complicated fight. He had the biggest ambitions and also contacts and acquaintances with people in Washington, in Brussels, in Strasbourg, to get things done. He was talking to them, he was persuading them, he was making speeches, he was emotional, he was a very good, and he is, let's not talk about him as someone who, who we lost for 25 years. I'm sure he will be very soon, not very, but soon he will be free. But what I remember about him is that he was the best in this sanctioning Russia policy. And this is why they hated him so much. This is why they always thought about Vladimir Kara-Murza as a personal traitor, personal problem, personal enemy to them. I remember how in 2012, the United States imposed Magnitsky Act. And I would just remind you briefly, what was the reaction of Russian Federation? It was furious, first thing, and the second, they have imposed Dima Yakovlev's so-called law in Russia, very well known in Russia as a law of подлецы, закон подлецов. Как это будет? No one knows how it's going to be in English, but
I'll think of the word. Yeah,
a law of very bad people. So Russia's answer to Magnitsky's Act, which sanctioned just a bunch of influential people in Russia, has caused an answer banning Russian children, Russian orphans, from being adopted in the United States of America. Vladimir Putin and his parliament and others have with their own hands broken the lives of so many children, just because they were so furious that America has imposed sanctions against, influential corruption figures in Moscow. So he kept on trying. He kept on fighting for that. And on February 24th, when Russia started this full-scale invasion of a neighboring country, Vladimir Kara-Murza in the morning was in a studio of TV Rain in Moscow saying, I can quote him almost, saying that now Europe and the West, the whole West, would at last understand what this regime is about. And at last they will understand that for so many years, it was worth understanding that Vladimir Putin and others are criminals. But now it will be very tough sanctions, very tough measures imposed against the decision makers in Moscow. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that everything that Vladimir was fighting for is right now being done. But this is another topic for discussion. What I know is that he's the biggest fighter I've ever met in my life. And what I know is that he knew what he was doing. He is the bravest person. He is a fighter, and we will do everything that we have in our hands to help him. Thank you.
Ekaterina, thank you so much. That law is actually, I think, is the English word is scoundrel. So the law of the scoundrels, закон подлецов. Thank you very much. So I want us to go to Sergei Lagodinsky next. Dr. Sergei Lagodinsky is a member of the European Parliament in Germany. He is the first, from Germany, he is the first vice chair of the Parliament's Committee on Legal Affairs. He's also working on the Committee of Foreign Affairs, as well as the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. He has been one of the most active speakers on Russia-related issues in Germany and in the EU. He has been a regular participant in the European Parliament's official reports on Russian politics. So I want to turn to you, Sergei, and ask you, what has been the reaction in Germany and the EU to this case? Tell us about that.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. This is a very important meeting. I think it's one of the first meetings devoted to Vladimir, and I think even listening to the colleagues here on the panel, I think the three main points made him to this target of this very vindicative regime is his personality, because he's a very special person. He's not like many others. He's not like Alexei Navalny, with whom I'm also, in a very good contact and friends. We're friends, but these are different people. I mean, without comparing anyone to anyone, but Vladimir is something that, in Russian there is this term intelligent, which doesn't mean intelligent. It actually means someone who is really decent, who is really a part of this intelligentsia. And I think he is very intelligently person. And through that, he could be, for many people, those people are vulnerable. But he was not vulnerable. He was very strong, precisely because of the second point and because of his mission. He had a mission. He was a mission-driven person. He was not a politician. He was someone for whom his values and his goals resulted from this inner driver, a mission of Russia to be free, and the citizens of Russia to be free. And he is one of the last believers on international arena, those who really believe that Russians deserve to be free, and not just because they're people, but just because they're also Russian citizens. And the third one was also mentioned because of his skills. He was doing it in a very professional way, explaining things, knowing things in detail, always reaching out and doing it in a very professional, international level standard. And I think these three dimensions of him make him a very, very unique person. And we know this in Brussels and now in Strasbourg. I'm speaking from Strasbourg now. And people know this in Berlin and in many other capitals. And that's why our reaction was prompt and very clear from the very beginning. We right away decided to have a resolution on Kara-Murza. It will be a resolution on him and other political prisoners, but he is in the first place. And from my perspective, in the epicenter of this resolution, we're already now drafting text, and we'll be negotiating it tomorrow, and we'll be voting on it tomorrow. For us, it is very clear that his name should be emblematic for the fight and the hope, the last hope that we have for Russian democracy and Russian people. Because as you know, the discussions everywhere in this world is not very flattering regarding the potential of Russian nation for a free democratic future, considering the crimes that are being committed now in the name of this nation. This name has been stolen from the nation. And Vladimir was one of the last tokens, one of the last guarantors who guaranteed that this nation is worth for fighting. The soul of this nation is worth fighting for. And that's why it's so important that he survives and will be free and can be active. And I think it is important to name the names of the perpetrators, of those who are responsible for this crime against Vladimir and against Russia and Russian democracy. We will, of course, call nation governments to do everything possible. I think it is important also to call European governments, but also UK, to cooperate together. Unfortunately, UK is not part of the EU anymore, but this cooperation is important. And I do think it is important also, I mean, it's not up to us, but to remind national governments, but also our British friends, of the fact that he is also part of the European community and also of the UK nation and UK community. And there are certain obligations on our behalf regarding to do everything possible to make his release possible in the future. And these are the main points, I think, that are important. And of course, as with most of these political prisoners, and this is one of the problems, and I think this is one of the calculations of the Kremlin, to increase the number of such cases to the degree that we are not, that we have difficulties focusing on one case, that we have more and more cases, and it is necessary to multiply those resolutions and multiply those calls on foreign governments, etc. And by that, kind of disperse our political attention and our political capital, so that it is no more possible to focus on some one name like we had with Navalny before. Now it's another name. And of course, there are many names whom we don't know in everyday life. And I mean, Yashin is one of the most prominent, but there are many. Every day, there are people who are being under pressure. And this is, by the way, another proof that there is a resistance in Russia, within Russia. The number of names to whom we have to devote our political attention because they are imprisoned in an unfair way for political reasons, just for speaking out the truth and speaking out against this war. So we, in the short term, very pragmatic, we're doing the resolution, but in the long term, we will increase our pressure. There is a conference of Liberal Moderna. This is a large and a good and interesting organization in Berlin, where I'm going tomorrow. This was planned before, but now it will be devoted solely to Kara-Murza, to his name. It will be dedicated to his name. It's about Russia and the future and Russia's democracy and the West. And I'm sure there will be many more such signs. For now, it is important we stand with his family, with his mother, with Evgenia, his wife, who I think now is in the States and also is very active on that. And of course, we stand with Vladimir and will do everything possible to support and to release him.
Thank you very much, Sergei, for this. Okay, I want us to now go to Sergei Parkhomenko, who is a colleague here at the Kennan Institute. He is a senior advisor here. He's a Russian journalist, publisher, founder of several projects aimed at developing civic activism and promoting liberal values in Russia. Sergei hosts a YouTube channel, Sut Sabытия. You can frequently see him as a guest on other popular YouTube streams. Sergei, I want to ask you to give us perhaps a broad overview of what Russian civil society abroad can do in response to this growing repression in Russia. What should be its mission? What should be its actions? Give us a sense of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you for having me here. You know, first of all, I want to remind you maybe the most important thing, even if my colleagues have already said so many times. Vladimir Kara-Murza was declared a traitor to this state, not because he engaged in espionage or because he disclosed state secrets or because he let some secret document leak or anything like that. No. He got this 25 years of prison because he openly, publicly expressed his opinion in major political issues, participated in public events. Finally, he was accused and sentenced for this 25 years of prison for exactly what, for example, my colleague Ivan Pavlov or Ekaterina Katrikadze or myself, where all three Russian citizens are doing now. We are speaking at a public discussion now, and he was speaking at a public discussion, no difference. Of course, it was one more thing. It's the famous activity of Vladimir Kara-Murza. He spoke in various audiences for American politicians and experts, especially in the United States Congress, about the sanctions against persons who violate human rights in Russia. And he also did it openly and publicly. And the Magnitsky Act, Vladimir Kara-Murza worked for the Magnitsky Act and was one of the first inventors of idea of Magnitsky Act and partisan of Magnitsky Act. His work in particularly in American Congress was great. And maybe our audience not know it, but the very judge who sentenced yesterday Vladimir Kara-Murza for this 25 years of prison, Judge Sergei Podoprigorov, was one of the individuals on the list of Magnitsky Act. So this sentence is a direct revenge on Vladimir Kara-Murza for his political work. That is very important. This because it's for a public work, for a public work on professional politician. 2 years ago, in order to imprison Alexei Navalny, the most famous, most active, most effective political opponent of Putin, it was necessary for Russian power, for the Kremlin, to fabricate a fraud case. Navalny is in prison because of fraud. That's inscribed in his Sentences Act. This case was completely falsified. There is not a word of truth in it. And there, on the case of Kara-Murza, the accusation has already become direct, open. Putin's enemy is a state traitor now. And this is a result of these 2 years. What happened in these 2 years? War. This is what happened. The importance of this verdict is that it marks a new period, new era in the history of Russian justice, or to be more correct, Russian injustice. And this is a kind of final end of a quite a long process. We often hear today the questions of why Russian citizens do not protest against the war, why they do not speak out against totalitarian dictatorship, why they do not protest even when hundreds and thousands of men in Russia are mobilized to the front and are being killed senselessly in this war. The answer in particular is that Russia, for at least the last 22 years, all the time of Putin power, of Putin period in Kremlin, Putin and his entourage is in power. The authority have step by step criminalized any civic activity, any activity in which it is possible to see disagreement with Putin's regime. This also happened to civic activism, to human rights activities of any kind, including ecological activists, people who fight for the right of minorities, nationalities, genders, national history, and it also applies to journalistic activity. And finally, it applies to political activity, to any oppositional activity. The sequence of events is always the same first this work of activists, of human rights defenders, or journalists, or politicians is declared suspicious, then the state increased the control. Then the authority restricted, and then declare illegitimate, and finally criminal. Just recently, this process has come to its logical conclusion in the media field. The enormous number of Russian journalists in Russia are declared enemy of the state, according to the law in foreign agents. Civil rights of these people have been abolished, and right of their profession is no longer exist. There are in Russia more than 680 foreign agents in Russia today, and almost 90 indesirable organizations. Most of them are connected in one way or another with the media. I myself, I'm also a foreign agent. My number is 374. And Ekaterina Katrikadze is also on the list of foreign agents. And the World TV channel Dost also is a foreign agent, and Ivan Pavlov personally too, and his entire legal NGO too. So we are 3 Russian on this panel, and there are 5 sentences of foreign agent for 3 persons.
In spite of list of undesirable organizations.
Yeah, okay. So 4 foreign agents and 1 undesirable organization. Okay. Yeah. Even more interesting. And so this is the most important preparation for war. This is the this process of intensifying repressions. This is the process who have as a purpose is to prevent any protests or any rebellion. That's the point of this work of state. That's the point of this changes. The opposition must be completely deprived of the activists or leaders, human rights activists or journalists or politicians. And what we are witnessing today, and this process of Kara-Murza is just the end of this story and the beginning of a new period. Two weeks ago, near Berlin, we organized a large Russian journalist conference under the auspice of Russian newsroom program organized by the Kennan Institute. And for the most part of the participants of this conference was the journalists working in exile. Hundreds of Russian journalists left Russia after the war began. Dozens of Russian media recreated themselves in other countries. Did no work there. But there were also many journalists who continued to work in Russia, including far from Moscow in different regions of the country. The discussion of this conference showed that the professional Russian journalistic communities know very well what is the conditions under which he has to continue his work. We understand that we are in the same box, same boat with the politicians. And the hate of the totalitarian regime is now directed at us as the main enemy. Our work is being declared step by step, not just indesirable. It's being declared a crime. And the case of Ivan Safronov, with his 22 years of prison, Ivan Safronov was sentenced also because his open public work, because of writing articles and publishing his on the newspapers, no more. So that's the demonstration of this process. It was for us that some special articles on the Russian criminal code was adopted, spreading false information about the army. It's for us, for journalists. Discrediting participants in a special military operation. It's a crime in Russia. It's a crime in Russia today to call a war. It's a crime in Russia to write that the Russian army is destroying peaceful Ukrainian cities and robbing and terrorizing people in Ukraine. All this is now a crime in Russia. And the most persistent criminals between journalists will be charged with high treason. And this is not just an automatic instinctive aggression for a totalitarian regime against any truth. It's a very calculated, intentional activity of the regime. In this way, it protects itself from any resistance. It guaranteed that there will be no protests, because it is the work of journalists that is the foundation of any civic engagement. People need to know the truth, and then they have a reason to protest because of this truth. Russian independent journalists know this mission, and we saw at the recent conference that they are ready to continue this work by reaching out of their audiences in Russia, even from exile. Thank you.
Sergey, thank you very much. This is really important, the point that you're making, and this is why we place such an emphasis at the Kennan Institute on working with independent Russian journalists, because it's a foundation of democracy. I think it's something that Americans understand very well, free speech and free press. And so much of Vladimir Kara-Murza's case is about free speech, right? Essentially, that's what Ivan was telling us, that what has been criminal about his case. In his case, the criminal element is really just free public expression. That's what he is being punished for with 25 years, with a 25-year sentence. Ekaterina, I want to turn to you and ask you, because I think there is a natural continuation here into, I think a lot of people may be under the impression that Russian independent journalism is dead. It's, in fact, as we saw at this recent conference that Sergey mentioned, it's very much not dead, and it has recreated itself with extraordinary speed over this past year abroad, and it's working, and there are new projects, and there are platforms that have been reestablished, such as yours, TV Rain. So I wonder if you could maybe tell us what's happened to TV Rain over this past year, and what you're doing now, how you're doing it, and how you're reaching your audience in Russia, because I know it's also very difficult with various technological barriers in place.
Well, first of all, I would mention that technological barriers are important, and this is serious, but so far we still have YouTube. YouTube in Russia is not banned. It's a common knowledge that everything is banned in Russia, but YouTube is not actually. It will be eventually. I'm absolutely sure, and all of us, all the colleagues, we understand that it will happen, because it's just impossible to have YouTube working in Russia in these circumstances. But on this stage, because of various reasons, including their own problems with their own, bloggers and influencers that need YouTube, because RooTube as an alternative is not very efficient. That's why this is one of the reasons they're not blocking YouTube so far. So that's why YouTube has become a new Russian political television. At this conference that Sergei Parkhomenko has kindly organized with your participation and participation of others, we were discussing, by the way, how much of political content is on YouTube 24/7. Like, you can sit in front of your computer and watch. Literally, every single moment, there is something going on YouTube. There are different journalists, political activists, and others who are using this platform as the only chance to talk to Russians, and Russians are watching. So what I can say about the efficiency of journalists in exile is that we understand that there is approximately 20 million, up to 20 million people who watch TV Rain and others. We have pretty much the same numbers, maybe someone less, someone more. Well, okay, I will talk about TV Rain, which I know exactly is that we have up to 22, 23 million unique viewers on YouTube monthly, and 65, 70% are in Russia. These are people who still live in Russia physically. This is very important. So it's a big number. We can do better, I know, and we are trying to. We are thinking about new formats. We're thinking about new approaches. We are thinking about, for example, today I will air a very important conversation with Yulia Galyamina of TV Rain's journalists, myself and Yulia Galyamina, a Russian politician who is still there in Russia. And we're talking about this gap that we are witnessing right now unfortunately witnessing right now between those who left and those who stayed. This is something that we need to think about. We need to build these bridges, and we need to remember that the main audience is still there. So TV Rain is doing okay. We moved on March 2nd. The big part of TV Rain's journalists moved on March 2nd after the website was blocked, after we got the messages about the special forces coming to the studio, and there were threats and personal threats. I got thousands of personal threats. The editor-in-chief of TV Rain, Tikhon Titko, and others were getting. So we left on March 2nd. We relaunched TV Rain in July of 2022 from Riga, Latvia. We had some issues with the regulator here. I think it's important and interesting. So long story short, we are moving to Amsterdam, Netherlands, I think in late June, July, something like that. So we are seeing that it does make sense. One important thing is that when the mobilization was declared by Vladimir Putin, we saw the wave of new viewers. I suppose these are people who used to watch propaganda every day. 8 million of new unique viewers, plus additional 8 million. People were searching for the real information. They were searching for the conversation with Ivan Pavlov and Sergei Parkhomenko, who would not lie to them, right? Because they know that they're being foolish, but they feel comfortable. The big part of society, unfortunately, they feel comfortable to watch this propaganda. So after the mobilization went slowly down, they got back. The big part of them got back. But what we saw is that there is a potential. Thank you. It was too long, I know. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. This is really important. Ivan, I want to ask you, actually, so we've talked a lot about how independent journalism has been a primary target of the regime up to now. And the question that I always have when I listen to the talks about political prisoners who are being defended is, but how is it that lawyers continue to be able to operate, and human rights defenders continue to be able to operate inside Russia? What is happening with your profession, which is so crucial now as the repressions are gaining speed? are these people able to get professional legal representation? Are lawyers themselves going to be subject to repressions? Tell us about that.
Lawyers in Russia never feel comfortable, and of course, last from the maybe 2000 beginning of 2000s, we feel like situation became worse and worse in a legal system, because in the end of 90s, I used to work as a lawyer, as a practitioner lawyer in the end of 90s. Since actually 1994, and I feel like all developing in a good direction. We had a hope. We had a hope that Russian courts could work, and they sometimes they pass revolutionary decisions, and we were proud of it. But situation became changed since 2005, I think, and position of lawyers also getting worse and worse. And now we have recently, just actually yesterday, court department of the Supreme Court just published annual statistics. And we saw that the same level of the acquittance in Russia. It's in a last year it was a 0.17% of the acquittance only. Yeah, it show like our KPI. That's how government assess our impact in a criminal law system, justice system. So of course it's not very correct to compare with the United States or with what's the situation in Western Europe, but let's compare with Georgia. Georgia, I mean republic in a South Caucasus, and or Kazakhstan, for example. So Georgia Republic has a 8% of acquittance, and we are from the one system, we raised from the one Soviet system. It's very comparable numbers. We have a 0.17%. They have 8%. Even in Kazakhstan, they have a 5% of acquittance. And and of course, all the system just became very aggressive to the lawyers. I saw like my friends, my lawyers' friends, colleagues, just now some of them in jail. For example, Dmitry Talantov, who is actually leader of the regional bar chamber, lawyers bar chamber, and he's in a detention center and still waiting his sentence. With a case, the same case which accused Vladimir Kara-Murza, is dissemination of the fakes about the Russian army. And I look at each week we say that we see in a social media that our colleagues brought arrested and brought it in a jail because of their professional activity. And of course, how we can say that we can be effective now, but we still have to continue our work in spite of all of these conditions. Of course, we have all of us has a red line which we have not to cross. Yeah, but before this line, we have to continue our work and continue defend our clients. Because maybe not tomorrow, but soon, I hope soon, somebody will reconsider all cases, somebody will reconsider cases of Vladimir Kara-Murza, and this somebody should know what's the lawyers done in this case, what they done, and everything was correct, and he defend his client, he represent the position, and this position was true, and it will be reconsidered, but I hope it will be soon.
Thank you so much. Sergei Lagodinsky, I want to turn to you and ask you, you mentioned in your opening remarks that it is difficult these days to convince people that democracy is still possible in Russia. And I think it's very much, you were probably speaking about Europe, but it's certainly something that people feel in Washington after 30 years, since the Soviet Union fell, many people feel, well, we've invested so much into helping Russia become democratic, and this is where we are. How do we do that? How do we show Europe and the United States that there is this other Russia, that it exists, and democracy is possible?
I think telling stories about these people, when and I'm sorry that I mentioned Alexei Navalny again, but these are kind of the two emblematic figures now. But when Alexei returned from Berlin to Moscow, a lot of Western colleagues and friends came to me and asked me, because we were in contact, and they said they were almost outraged by that. How could he, and why did he go? It was clear that he will be jailed, and this is irresponsible. And my answer was, I think that a lot of us in the West, in Europe, in the United States, people forgot how it is to see and to deal with heroes. They don't know anything anymore. That it is actually that doing politics can be a heroical action, and the decisions are heroic decisions, because it is about life and death, and it's about freedom and prison, and I think telling these stories is the most important point, because now I've been traveling through Germany, and I'm sitting with people very regular, also in Eastern Germany. Those are not very easy discussions. Just 2 days ago, I was somewhere in the middle of Brandenburg again, and they said, they tell stories, either those who do not believe in Russia or those who believe in Kremlin only. And the only way to convince them is to tell them the story of the father of a girl who was taken away from him, because she was making a drawing against the war, and the father was decent enough to teach her that war is bad, and the whole terrible story around them, and the story of Kara-Murza, and the story of many others. These are the stories that have to be brought to European homes, to show to them what has been long forgotten, because luckily, thank God, people didn't have to go through this to feel free and to defend their democracy this way. So I think this personal stories is the best proof and the best means of winning back hearts and minds of Europeans towards the future of Russia. And it is a gamble. And we have to say this because, you know, we are trying to convince our constituencies to believe in something where we do not have guarantee that this something will materialize. Because we have been saying this for 30 years and look where we are. So we have to be honest about this. But I think empathy, something that is so important vis-a-vis our Ukrainian friends today, and is also lacking also in Europe in many cases. But I think on a different level, of course, without comparing it, I think also calling for empathy for those who have opposed this war and have been opposing Putin for years. These people have done, of course, they've done wrong. Maybe they did not, maybe they believed in certain components of this ideology or whatever. But these people did not support this war, and these people are paying their lives and their freedom in order to be able to protest against this war. And I think this is what we have to tell: these stories and these examples.
Well, and this is such an important point because, and I think it goes back to, there is sort of a failure between what Russian new political exiles are doing, and especially in Germany, in Berlin. Berlin has really emerged as the main center, I would say, right now of new Russian political exiles, between what they're actually doing and what the West sees or knows. And I think in a way it makes sense because Russian independent journalists are working in Russian, they're serving their audiences, the millions who are watching them, tens of millions who are watching them and reading them back home. But I think that there is room for, really, in fact, it's important to make an effort to speak to Western audiences and communicate those stories that you were talking about. So let's see, we have some questions from the audience. I want to remind people again that if you want to ask a question, please put it into the Q&A and give us your name and perhaps affiliation, and we will ask this question. So we have a couple of questions that relate to Evan Gershkovich's arrest. So one question is, why are we, very often the discussions seem to be separate, you know, so we discuss what's happening to Russian political prisoners versus what's happening to Western journalists who have, and not just journalists who have been seized in Russia. Are these two different categories? Does it make sense to discuss them together? Do they complement each other? I don't know, maybe it's for Ivan. I don't know if anybody else wants to take this question.
Maybe Ekaterina, no? Okay.
No, the only thing that we can say here is that there are a lot of talks, maybe rumors, if this word is appropriate here, about the exchange of prisoners. And Ivan knows much better than I do. But what we know about Vladimir is that he is a foreign citizen. He has a passport of Great Britain. Evan Gershkovich, of course, is a citizen of the United States. We saw 4 ambassadors yesterday at the court in Moscow, and we know that the diplomats they do, and representatives of 40 countries were there also, besides the ambassadors. So what we see is that the diplomats are doing anything they can. Unfortunately, in these circumstances, it's in vain. But the only hope we have right now is whether there is a chance to change these people. And I don't know, even Margarita Simonyan, the main face of Russian propaganda, has written down some ridiculous, but still post talking about that. And so, Ivan, I think you know better.
Yeah, I think that case with Evan Gershkovich is just a message to the all foreign journalists who works in Russia, because, you know, Russian journalists hear this message year before, maybe little bit like maybe year and a half before. that case with Ivan Safronov was a message to the Russian journalists that they have to be careful, and actually they have to be outside.
Shut up. Yeah.
The best place to work, and most of them hear this message, and now most of the independent journalists are in exile. Yeah, they work from the outside, and they live in foreign countries, and they have to. They were pushed from their own country. And case with the Evan is a message to the foreign journalists, and now they have to hear it, because of course most of audience of the foreign journalists located abroad, yeah, but still they quite painful for the regime, and they somebody who write truth about the war for own audience, but this right is manipulated by the regime, and the regime doesn't want to share this right with somebody else, even with a foreign journalist, and of course second is second benefit from the case of Evan is a fulfill of the exchange fund. Yeah, they now has a very valuable human asset. Yeah. In this fund, and it can be changed on on somebody else. And of course all of us know that this process, I mean legal procedures with a espionage case, is very long, and I doubt that we have to wait some results during the court system under Vladimir Putin. Yeah, and it's time to work for the exchange, but it's of course it's diplomatic work, and it should be. I think it's already they already work on it, and some negotiation going on, but it's going in a not openly. We don't know about this, and maybe it's maybe we will know something after he will released. I hope that it comes very, very soon.
Well, and of course, it also, as you say, it sends a message to foreign media. And so, it makes the future of foreign journalists who are in Russia very problematic. And I don't know, what do we know about Western media now in Russia? This is one of the questions that we have from our audiences. Are they staying? Are they leaving? Is it going to change the way they report? Who would like to address this?
As I know that some of ambassadors in Russia, ambassadors of foreign countries, as United States, for example, they just highly recommended all citizens of their country, of the United States, just leave. It's inspired their journalists or not. It's just American, any foreign country citizens can be now be arrested of the arrest.
There are some journalists still in Russia, as I know, but some big newspapers, for example, some big media outlets which used to work forever in Russia, have decided to to ask their colleagues to go back to European and countries and the United States. But there are still several people. For example, there is a very brave journalist, BBC's journalist, who is, I mean, whatever happens, he's still there. I don't know how he does that, but yeah, he's there. And but you know, overall, we know that the working process for foreign journalists became more tough than it was before. Just before Evan was arrested, we saw him in Riga a couple of months earlier, and we had this feeling of envy, you know, that he could go back to Moscow without any problems. And there was, you know, common knowledge among journalists that for foreign journalists, there was no threat. And now this is ruined as well. No one is safe anymore. Of course, there are some brave, bright, I don't know, people, heroes, who decide to do their jobs, whatever it takes. But the biggest part will leave Russia. Russia is becoming absolutely isolated. This is a very big problem.
Right. Well, and for Russian media abroad, I know that many of you rely on stringers on the ground and you anonymize them, and you know, no name can be named. So it's quite a different environment in which to report news. So and again, your work is becoming even more important under the situation. We have a question from Viola Ginger. I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. So she is expressing what actually Sergei Logodinsky and I were just talking about, the skepticism about Russia, about the future of Russia. And she's asking whether the country, in fact, can rebound someday, or whether it might require an utter military defeat along the lines of Hitler's Germany. Now, I don't know if we have somebody on the panel who would like to address this. Would anybody like to speak to that?
Of course, these are discussions that we are conducting also from a geostrategical perspective. What is our strategy vis-a-vis Russia, regardless of the outcome of the military operation on the ground? By which I mean, of course, the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. Most of us are, of course, skeptical about a military defeat. I mean, I think that it is possible that we will see, you know, the best we can hope for is some military advances on the Ukrainian side that will kind of shatter. Do you say this? It will shatter the foundations of the solidity of the power basis of the Kremlin, and that it will implode, or there will be some change on the top. But of course, we cannot talk. I mean, it's illusionary to talk about defeat comparable to the Hitler Germany, just for the mere fact of the nuclear power in the hands of Putin and conventional arms that Russia has. And there is no willingness of the West to engage into military confrontation, even on the territory of Ukraine, let alone on the territory of Russia. So we will have to to spell out a strategy, which will be probably something like a Cold War plus, where there will be a strategy of deterrence and mutual threat. And where Ukraine will have to be rebuilt in a way of resilient power that would be able to sustain any future risk and any future threat. And that we need even for rebuilding and reconstructing of Ukraine, because otherwise nobody will, no investments will be done in Ukraine if it is possible that in a couple of months or in a couple of years, this whole game will restart. So it's in our own interest. That's why I think what we have to aim at and will aim at is probably a long, very long game. If no accident will happen in between. And that means that thinking about the future of democracy in Russia will also have to be adjusted accordingly. It will be about preserving the civil society and the opposition, supporting civil society and opposition, keeping them alive, because this is, from my perspective, from the perspective of many of us, the only bridge into the future, democratic future of Russia that we have.
Sergey, thank you, Lagodinsky. I want to stick with you for another question. So it's a question that comes to us from Stanislav Stanskih, who writes that despite an enormous exodus from Russia, the US still has no plans yet to provide humanitarian protection for, I'm sorry, the question just jumped. The oppression for Russians fleeing political repression and mobilization. Should this approach be reconsidered? I actually want to turn it a little bit, because you are, I want to ask it from the European perspective. I know that Germany, for example, has made really big strides toward making it possible for for those fleeing Russian political repression to live and work, resettle in Germany. What did it take to convince the German government to do that? And are you doing that, or is this being done in the rest of in other European countries? And the reason I'm switching to Europe is because we don't actually have someone here in the US or a US experts who can comment on this. From my personal perspective, I think the US does need to change it. But tell us about what Europe is doing, because I think it's really ahead of the US on this.
I mean, some of the people on the panel can probably speak about it better from their own experience, because they had to go through this very complex issues. From my perspective, it was important in Germany for us to find a way, and it is also very, very often legal issues. It's not even a lack of political will, especially in Germany, but everywhere in Europe. We are in a kind of a rule of law based, and thus very kind of legalized framework, and also on a continent which is, let's say, is reluctant to be open, to have open borders, because what we are doing now for one category of people from one country, we will have to do for other categories of people from other countries. And you know that even people, countries like Poland or others, or the Czech Republic, who are open now to vis-a-vis Ukrainian refugees, are not very open vis-a-vis refugees from other countries. So it is a delicate balance. And in Germany, we managed to find it, and this balance is limited. And this is actually the gist of the question nowadays. It is targeted and pointed, with all the difficulties, at those who oppose the regime and who are threatened by the regime, or those who can support themselves and have a kind of a freelance basis, and or we find fellowships and find a combination of supporting mechanisms for those who are in the press and kind of the cultural elites of Russia. Where we do have difficulties are people who are the so-called deserters, the people who that want to escape from the draft. And this is something where I personally don't see much room, because these are other numbers. And these are very often people where countries, European countries, are reluctant to get just any Russians, even if they're escaping and running for their lives, any Russians without discriminating in accordance to their beliefs and their attitude vis-a-vis the regime. And this would be the result if we are talking about giving opportunity for those who are escaping the draft. We will not be able to screen these people in accordance with their political attitudes. And that is something that, to be honest, I cannot demand from countries like Poland, like the Baltic states, who have a history of their own, have proximity and the security risks, which are totally different. So I completely understand this. And quite frankly, even in Germany, we have plenty of Russian-speaking bubbles who already are not in line and on the same line and on the same page as a democratic attitude would be. What we do have is asylum procedures for any draft escapers, in case the state authorities cannot prove that they are not escaping for political reasons. So there is a presumption of political protest if someone tries to escape the draft in a country committing crimes, war crimes, but these presumptions can be proved wrong by state authorities. So it's a regular asylum procedure. And what we're seeing now is a lot of cases of young men who are pushed back and who are either because of Dublin II, so they're pushed back to the countries where they first entered the European Union, or they're pushed back because they're denied asylum, because they're draft avoiders, full stop, and not political refugees. I personally think that this, as much as I understand that this is a terrible situation, but I do think that differentiating in accordance with political views is something where the balance is right. So I would rather broaden the humanitarian path for the opponents of the Putin regime and the war, rather than having kind of a broad and indiscriminate open door for anyone who wants to avoid the draft into the army.
Thank you very much. Sergei Parkhomenko, I want to ask you a question that Marsha Olive sent to us. And I think that Ekaterina Kotrikadze has already left us. She told us that she has a live broadcast coming up. But Marsha Olive is asking, how can Russia, oh, Katerina, you're here still. Okay,
no,
so maybe
I just
you
want
can
to
also
say
address
that I'm
this.
sorry and I need to go live right now. And thank you again.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you. So then, Sergei, this falls to you then. How can you as journalists reach Russians who remain comfortable with the Kremlin's propaganda? Is there a way to penetrate that bubble and that shell?
All Russian journalists try to do it. It's the most important professional problem now. They have actually two important problems. One is what we have to do to have some sources in Russia, to have some direct information, to have correspondence and some freelancers in Russia. And the second one, and most important one, is how to reach Russian audience. Now, it's only some internet instruments. Firstly, social media help us to work with Russian audience. Firstly, YouTube. So we are very it's a very risky to have this YouTube blocked in Russia, and we have more and more rumors about it, and more risk about the ban of YouTube in Russia. It will be very important in this contact between Russian press, Russian media, and Russian audience. We need some cooperation, some help from big tech. It's absolutely sure that the reaction of this of the big companies like Google and YouTube, Facebook, all this is absolutely neutral for now. And this company, it's a very difficult to contact, very difficult to speak about Russian situation. And we will try to organize some maybe some conversations, some workshop between representatives of these big tech companies and Russian independent media outside of Russia. It's a crucial point now. But I'm sure we will find something, because if it's not Facebook, it was YouTube. It's not YouTube. It will be Telegram or something like this. I know some companies working hard now to create some communication possibilities for work of Russian media, even in the worst case. The worst case is the isolation, the total isolation of Russian internet from global internet. It's called, it's a very special name of Cheburnet, the isolated Russian internet, isolated itself as a fish tank with absolutely closed. But even in this situation, it's possible to find some technical decision, very difficult, very special, and it will ask some help from activists inside Russia to work with Russian public. But we hope.
Sergey, thank you so much. So we have come up to the end of our event. I know Sergey Lagodinsky has to go now, and we unfortunately have many more questions that we can address. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sergey.
Bye.
Bye.